When the top chase cards of an era start to look like this, it becomes abundantly clear that Pokemon cards are finally reversing from the crazy chaos. Though the question we're all really wondering right about now, what about the new sealed products? However, before we get into the topics of today's video, I'm actually giving away 2 PSA 8 Umbreon Eevee game stamped promos. Now these are going to 2 different subscribers. Now to know if you won one of these slabs, if I do reply to your comment with a Moonbreon emoji, then congratulations, you're having one of these sent your way. And hey, if you are new to the channel, welcome aboard. My name's Phil. I try and make content around Pokemon cards and hopefully simplify some of the chaos. Feel free to subscribe to the channel to stay in the loop for consistent topics around Pokemon investing and Pokemon collecting content. So, the topic surrounding the Pokemon market coming down in price is a highly contentious issue because, a lot of the viewers on this channel specifically have investments in collectibles. So some people don't like this because it can mean like, whoa, hey Phil, you're saying my cards are gonna go down in price, while others get very excited because it means they can collect their favorite cards once again, and buy at reasonable prices. And I get both sides though as well. If you do watch this channel, I like to take a very realistic approach with a lot of my viewers. And the reality is, and pretty much still is, that Pokemon cards became inflated because too many scenarios happened all at the same time that caused this upwards pressure. So, a really good data point for you to reference, and if you do really want to see how Pokemon cards went around, is if you go on Google Trends and you search Pokemon cards, you can see the moment that Pokemon TCG Pocket released in November 2024, you can see just how much more search volume happened. And you can see how much more new demand came in with Pokemon cards. And this is the same time that people started arguing over getting product, and it's become a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And what I mean by that is that Pokemon cards are hard to get. Now, the harder they are to get, more people start pre-ordering new sets. Then pre-orders get sold out, so more people FOMO, and so on and so forth. So it's almost like this artificially created scenario. Though a lot of us who have been collecting for a while did see what was happening during the chaos. So let's get into this video and you can see the very early stages of the market correction. All right, so the market correction that's kind of taking place right now, we are at the very early stages of this market correction, and it's very, very interesting to see, and it is quite timely, okay? Because like I said, with Pokemon investing and Pokemon collecting, one thing that's very important to know is when it does come to that US, Europe summer period, Pokemon cards usually do go down in value during that time. You can see that with the 151 Charizard. Check this out, man. I'm on the month graph and just check this out, man. Selling for $271, found a high in early March for $295, and look at this, man, all the way down to 246 USD. Pretty significant drop just in the month, right? It does make you wonder what's happening right now with the current market, right? Because one thing that I'm thinking when I see this 151 Charizard, right, is, and a lot of people are saying this, right? There's a lot of talk in the community that just 151 booster bundles and so much stock is coming on the market. And that is a possibility, right? Because you got to remember the Charizard is difficult to pull, but it's nowhere near as difficult to pull as the Greninja or the Surging Sparks Pikachu. So it is actually a more easier to acquire card than those two. Though you also got to remember that Pokemon 151 is going to be 2 years old a little bit later this year. So that also is a thing to consider. Now, there's actually some exciting news because I've teamed up with Collector and we are both giving away this PSA 10 Japanese Espeon VMAX. You can enter the giveaway within my channel's Discord, which can be found in the description of this video. So today's video sponsor is the Collector app. Now, one thing that's really important to understand if you've invested in collectibles, or maybe you've invested in some of the cards that I've shown you today, don't get worried if you see cards dipping or shifting downwards in price, because what's more important than all of that is to be accurately tracking your collectible portfolio so you can make informed decisions over a long period of time. And that's actually what the Collector app does best. Collector is an all-in-one collectible tracking portfolio which pulls in pricing data from recently sold listings and updates pricing within the app. And it's all done in the one place. Now, if you do upgrade to the Pro version, you can even take photos of your cards and it will scan it into the app, making it super easy to to populate your cards in your portfolio. Definitely feel free to check out the app. All the details of the collector app can be found within the description of this video. Now, another one that's really interesting is the Latias EX from Surging Sparks. You can see this card was selling for around 243, found a little bit of a high point in February 28th for 256 USD, and right now selling for 221. I'm not too surprised with this one in particular because of course what's happening right now, Surging Sparks is getting a reprint, right? So because we know that a lot of these cards, people aren't too bullish on them. They're kind of saying, well, summer's coming up. Well, you know what? We are getting reprints. We don't know how big they're going to be. You know what? Maybe I'm not going to overpay on this card. And a lot of people who have this card are thinking, well, maybe I should sell this card now and then buy it back later. Now, another really interesting one is the Ceruledge illustration rare from Surging Sparks. Now, truth be told, this one's actually surprising me a little bit because, you know, we had this huge illustration rare phase just happen, right? If you didn't know what was happening during February and early March, people really were into the illustration rares. Drowzee, Bonnet, you know, all these cards, Baxcalibur, they were all going up in price and now they've come down. But you can see the Ceruledge is actually going down in the last month. Check this out, man. Selling for around $38 around February 24th. And you can see right now selling for $28, a $10 drop. Now that's actually quite a significant percentage drop for this card. If we pull this into the last 3 months, check how this one's performed. You can see this card when it kind of released was selling for 44, then it kind of came down to 33, rised all the way up to 38, and now you can see it's at its market low of 28 USD. I am very interested to see where this card goes because if we do have a reprint coming, more Ceruledges will be coming onto the market. You know, a lot of people are probably not too bullish with this, and I think a lot of people are kind of wondering as well now with illustration rares, okay, they can climb in value as well, but is it a little bit artificial? Because I'm going to be taking you through some of the artificial rises of illustration rares. So I think a lot of collectors, you know, investors are kind of thinking with illustration rares, how much can we trust if they start rising in value quickly as well? Because that's actually a big thing right now, right? Cards were getting manipulated left, right, and center a few weeks ago. So I think a lot of people are now saying, well, it has to be kind of realistic prices as well, because if they're blowing out of control, you know, they might be being manipulated. Check this out. We can see the Baxcalibur illustration rare from Paldar Evolved. Check out that graph, dude. You can see so clearly in the last 3 months what happened with this card. I mean, it is so obvious that obviously something really strange happened. And I think a lot of people now are just wondering, well, if illustration rares rise too quickly, maybe they are not to be trusted. Check this one out, man. Selling for around $10 in December last year. Then it climbed all the way up to 52 USD. What a ridiculous price increase. And you can see right now, look at that, man, selling for $24. Sure, it's still double the price from, you know, December, but still something really strange with this card. If we look in the last month graph, you can see that that is consistently falling down, and maybe it will go down to 15 USD. We don't know, but you can see that's why with illustration rares, people are a little bit cautious, I think, now. And I think that Ceruledge that I was talking about before is actually within a pretty fair price point within the market. Now, moving on to the Drowzee illustration rare, really cool card, but you can see in the month graph that's also coming down. I'm going to pull this in the last 3 months so you can get a bit of a perspective of what happened with this card, right? You can see this card was selling for around $17 in December, and then it found a market high of around $77. I think it even went up to $80 at one point, right? And you can see now that that is coming down, selling for around 40 USD. Look, it's a pretty cool card. I do think $40 is kind of okay for this card, particularly how awesome the artwork is, but maybe, you know, when it went to $80, now it's kind of already dropped, you know, half in price. Where is it going to go in the few months? What's going to happen during the summer period? Sure, we may not be getting that much more Scarlet and Violet base coming out, but you know, at the same time as well, this card was selling for around $1,000 in PSA 10. Sure, it's around a 20% chance to get this card in a PSA 10, but you really do question, is it worth the price tag? Because, you know, for $1,000, you can get some pretty rare chase cards, man. For $1,000 US, you can get some very, very expensive cards. So, you know, that's a thing about when collecting collectibles, man. You gotta be careful to not get sucked in too easily, right? And I've been sucked in so much before. I've kind of gotten a little bit better these days, right? Because now, especially because I make this content and I'm always kind of looking at the market, I kind of have a very good overview of what's happening. Not because, because I'm something special or anything like that, but you know, when you do make content as consistently as mine, when you see comments so often from different people, when you got my Discord channel as well, I'm always getting so much information coming in, so I get a bit of a good perspective. You know, before this, man, I was a little bit silly. I would overspend on a lot of cards, and it's important that you kind of look at the market, you know, take a step back, and what's really important, right, is if you are buying some of these cards, make sure you love the card. Do not buy a card because you think it's going to go to the moon and you have no connection to it. When you buy collectibles, right, it's very important that you have a connection to the cards you're buying, because at the end of the day, this is a very emotionally driven hobby, right? Pokemon cards aren't doing anything other than giving us some sort of nostalgia and a bit of satisfaction when we have a PSA 10 card or we pull a chase card. So it is a very emotionally driven market. So for that reason, you do kind of need to purchase things that you love, because if you're buying them hoping that they're just going to be some really valuable cards one day, well, you probably shouldn't be buying Pokemon cards like that. You really should be, the first thing on your priority list is, do I love this card? If you do, go for it. But if you're just thinking, hey, this card's one day going to get manipulated, hey, this card's going to be super popular in a few years, hey this, hey that, hey, like I said, learn from my mistakes, buy what you love. Now, also, if you are a regular channel viewer, you'll probably notice that I do a lot of giveaways and gifts on my channel. They're a real cool way to see some of the winners celebrating when their cards land is through my channel's Discord server. Now, there's actually a section called the Gift Showcase where a lot of winners share their gifts. The server invite is in the description of this video. Now, the next one is the Bubble Mew, and I have to say, this card is probably, up there with probably one of the most popular cards of the Scarlet and Violet era. When we look at the Sword and Shield era, if we talk about the kind of golden card of the era, it was Umbreon, right? I don't actually think it's the Umbreon from Prismatic Evolutions. I actually think the Bubble Mew is the crown jewel of the Scarlet and Violet era so far. Even though the Umbreon from Prismatic Evolutions is the most expensive, I still don't think it has that unique aura that encapsulates it within the era, right? When we look at the Latias and Latios GX card, that really defined the Sun and Moon era. Same with Umbreon, and I do feel, unless some really cool new cards come along, but I have to admit, I think Bubble Mew has made a very strong place in the Scarlet and Violet era, so it is interesting to see the price coming down at the moment. As you can see, it was selling for around $264, climbed all the way to $421, and now it's selling for around $349. That's a pretty significant drop, right? From $421 to $349. Definitely a correction has taken place with this card. If we look in the year graph, you can see that this card has gone up from 80 USD, and obviously it's still up at $349, but it is pretty good to see a little bit of a dip has happened, because I do think it was just a little bit too overvalued. I do think because Paldean Fates is getting a reprint, that has definitely caused the market to kind of react to that. I'm interested to see when that stock comes out, and depending on how much stock comes out, where this Bubble Mew will go, because don't forget, it is pretty difficult to pull. Now, another one that's really interesting, on the topic of kind of market manipulation or whatever was happening, right, is the Brute Bonnet from Paradox Rift. You can see in the last 3 months, right, that was selling for $6, kind of went all the way up to $35, and check this out, man, now selling for 14 USD. Pull that in the month graph, and you can see that is just going down. I mean, I think this card is definitely worthy of the term crash from its high. It really hasn't crashed from December because it's still up, but from that market high that it had, that has kind of bottomed out pretty bad. And you know what? Probably fair enough. I mean, Brute Bonnet isn't really an established Pokemon. Mew is, right? Greninja is, Umbreon is, Rayquaza is. All these Pokemon are very established. When we look at cards like Brute Bonnet, you kind of do have to pull yourself out and wonder, is this card really going to be valuable in 15 years from today? Because it's probably not, because it doesn't have the fan demand. If you're going to be investing in collectibles, you have to think about long term. You can't just be thinking, is this card going to grow $30 in the next 3 weeks? When I buy my collectibles, I usually like to think what's going to happen in 20 years from today. Now, another one that's come down in value is the Eevee from Twilight Masquerade. I'm going to pull this into the 1 month graph so you can see what's happening. This card was selling for around $88 in February, and right now selling for $76. Just looking at the last 3 months, you can see this card, had a market high at the start of February for 104 USD and kind of fell down now to $77. Pretty significant little correction that's happened with this card, of course, because the reprint news has come about. As soon as reprint news comes about, people aren't too confident with their singles, because if you haven't experienced the reprint, what usually happens, I mean, right now times are different because, the whole Pokemon craze and everything, but if we're taking kind of the thought process of what usually happens when a reprint comes, this is how it goes. The reprint gets announced, people start selling off their singles or the top chase cards from those sets. When the reprint actually comes on shelves and people open the product, then we see an even bigger drop on the singles. And then around, 6 months to a year later, they start climbing up again. Now, another one that's really interesting is the Japanese Umbreon from Terastal Festival. You can see this card was selling for around $461 in January, right now selling for around $378. If we pull this into the last 6 months, you can see this card was kind of sitting around December for $287, went all the way up to $472 and now selling for $100 less off the market high at around $377. I do wonder if the Umbreon from Terastal Festival will go down more in price, because you know, one thing about this card, right, is with Japanese kind of Terastal Festival, you do have the guaranteed hit rates along with God packs and demigod packs, right? So because of that, you know, you will maybe get more of these come onto the market, and you know, the price definitely can come down. Now, another thing that we have to remember with Japanese products as well is Japanese cards do sometimes get quite heavy reprints. When we look at Pokemon 151, the Japanese reprint of last year was absolutely massive. So it is likely that, you know, Terastal Festival could also experience a reprint like that as well, but it's anyone's guess. Now, another really interesting one is the Gengar VMAX from Fusion Strike. In the last 3 months, you can see this card went from $511 all the way up to $748, and now it's kind of correcting at around this $670 mark. If we pull this into the 1 month graph, you can definitely see it's trickling down in price. I'm very interested to see where the Sword and Shield cards will go during the summer period, because if history repeats itself, we all know what happens during that summer period. Cards do start coming down in price. Now, I actually think one thing that stands out when looking at this data, and kind of a question that pops up, is whether or not there are any opportunities with the current market. Because, you know, with Bubble Mew coming down and 151 Charizard coming down in value as well, you know, it kind of makes you wonder, is there any cards right now that are under the radar and could potentially rise in value? And I actually do cover the 10 Pokemon cards to look out for right within this video here. Within this video that's appearing on screen, I go over the 10 Pokemon cards to currently look out for in the current market, and you can assess the opportunities. Click the video that's appearing on screen and you can see where some of the hidden opportunities are. I'll see you on that video.